Choose your character.
If you had to pick just one, who would be your favorite video game character of all time? For over half a century, the medium has hosted an unimaginable range of casts that are as lovable as they are diverse. Some have sword-wielding heroes in ancient lands, some have fantastic monsters on strange new worlds, some have NPCs you get weird, unbreakable crushes on for the rest of your life. Some even have Goku.
Hey, it's me, Goku!
The human heart doesn't play by fair rules, and it's safe to say that because of that, any character has the potential to be cute enough, weird enough, sad enough, or just plain funny enough to steal yours forever. And all they have to do is exist. Sometimes that's easier said than done though. From reveal to release, games go through an unimaginable number of changes that can reforge their entire identities at a moment's notice. These changes can range from small visual updates to stylistic overhauls that change a game completely from how it was first shown. While this often results in the loss of locations, items, cosmetics, and sometimes entire games, it can also lead to the loss of what could have been your favorite character.
I don't wanna go, sir, please, I don't wanna go.
On this special Lost Media Monday, I've dug through the history of some of gaming's most prolific series and developers, and unearthed some of the most interesting characters whose stories were written, but never told. So grab your Blorbos and leave a like, as we travel deep into the void to look at over 50 video game characters that don't exist. This is the Lost Character Iceberg. If you're not familiar, icebergs are a fun way to sort lists through descending levels of obscurity. The one used here was made by me, with positions based loosely on the popularity of the games and stories involved. The entries themselves are a bit more rigid. I defined a character as lost if they met the following requirements. 1. They don't make a canon appearance in any officially released game. A few of the characters here can still be found through leaked prototypes, hacking, data mines, or fan games, but I'm not counting those as official or canon. 2. These characters, as far as we can tell, were fully intended to be part of their final game. This means production material, assets, or even playable builds with them could realistically exist, since this is lost media and not non-existent media. And 3. No joke characters. Sorry, Zebron. So with the expectations set and the rules laid out, let's get started. One of the most prominent games of interest in mid-2000s Lost Media was Seta's Bioforce 8, a side-scrolling beat-em-up for the NES announced in 1991. Featuring a focus on blinding speed and excellent visuals, the game starred a pet monkey beefed up on super potion trying to save his family from a mad scientist. Bioforce 8 was actually the subject of a prominent hoax in 2005, when a mod at the Digital Press Forum created a fake account claiming to have a prototype, before breaking it due to arguments in the comments. They would eventually acquire a real prototype that would be found and dumped in 2010, and while the game is there to play, its cancellation still means this gross little love child between the Flash and Issei Uzaru will never get its chance to stand along the other titans of its intended era. It's hard to imagine where Resident Evil would be without its cast of reliable women and hard-headed himbos.
I've sent my right hand to dispose of you.
Your right hand comes off?
Or maybe it would just be hard to imagine without one specific character. Claire Redfield is the star of multiple games, a stable of high-profile spin-offs, and the relationship between her and her brother Chris is one of the more heartfelt aspects of the series' lore. But we almost lived in a world without any of that, as Leon's original co-star in RE2 was supposed to be a girl named Elza Walker. Elza was a motorcycle racer and student at Raccoon University who was able to survive the events of the game because she was cool like that, I guess.
Man, I think you're better than me.
I am better than you.
But as RE2 neared its original March 1997 release date, the development team was dissatisfied with what they had and overhauled a large amount of the game, pushing it back to January of 1998 and reworking it into the seminal horror entry we know it as today. Elza was a casualty of these changes, with the team reworking her into Claire Redfield in order to tie into the previous game's story and create a protagonist that made a bit more sense narratively. The developers consider Elza an early version of Claire, rather than a separate character, so she'll never fully exist within the Resident Evil universe itself. This was more or less emphasized when Elza's racing suit was added as a selectable costume for Claire in the RE2 remake. Another lost protagonist is the original heroine of Portal 2, named Mel. who holds the rare honor of being removed from her intended game twice. At first, Mel was the title's sole lead character, but playtesters were reportedly disappointed with the lack of established dynamic between her and GLaDOS, opening the door for Chell, the main character of the first Portal, to take over for the sequel. After being bumped from the game's top billing, Mel was added to the co-op campaign as Chell's backup, but developer Valve eventually decided to move the mode away from humans altogether, feeling that robot characters would add levity and make more sense with the mode's gameplay features, leaving Mel to the trash bin once again. While fan projects have tried to flesh her out, Mel still doesn't exist within Portal canon, and with the series having sat on a shelf for over a decade, it's hard to think she ever will. In 2018, a leak of the Pokemon Gold and Silver demos, created for Nintendo Space World 1997 event, revealed an entire generation's worth of early and discarded Pokemon designs that had gone unseen by the world for over 20 years. There are almost 100 Pokemon in the leaked Pokédex, and while some would be redesigned or reworked before Gen 2's release, others have never had clear spiritual successors, including these unused baby forms, this electric tiger Pokemon who was cut from both Gens 1 and 2, this funky little Ditto evolution, 2 cursed doll Pokemon, and 2 entire lines of starters, one for a volcanic bear, and one for a Loch Ness Monster type Pokemon. While none of these exist within the series canon, fans have embraced them like a fun, distant relative, creating fan art, merch, and mods of the Gen 2 games themselves that replace the final version's Pokemon with those from the beta. This means anyone eager to raise a Chorusou or catch this nightmarish Pinsir evolution can still see what it would be like. Just don't expect to be able to add them to your Pokemon bank or buy an official plush anytime soon. The Capcom 5 were a series of high-profile GameCube games announced for development in 2002. Infamously, most of these games would go on to either face massive production troubles or get re-released for other systems not long after their GameCube debut. The most mysterious of these games was Dead Phoenix, a fantasy shoot-'em-up that showcased massive enemies, cities in the sky, and a main character with golden angel wings, with this new Capcom hero reportedly being named Phoenix. Not that one. Outside of an initial announcement trailer, which you're watching now, the game was never mentioned again, leaving Capcom with just the one Phoenix. Belloc was meant to be a secret character that would debut in Mortal Kombat Gold, a Dreamcast update of the previously released Mortal Kombat 4. Created by Eurocom, who handled the port's development, Belloc was first unveiled through screenshots sent to Game Informer as part of a preview for MK Gold's release, which showed off both of his barely discernible costumes. Was he a horse? A dinosaur? A man with a passion for decorative helmets? Unfortunately, we'll never know, as Belloc was never completed due to time constraints, and was left off of the roster despite his strong presence in MK Gold's advertising. The final game includes a secret question mark on Tanya's character slot that wasn't present in MK4, and most fans believe this was where Belloc was supposed to go, though nothing confirms this. Over 20 years later, Belloc has yet to appear in any canon MK material, and even though Mortal Kombat is famous for turning jokes, background objects, and even fatality textures into full characters, rights issues stemming from Eurocom's involvement in his creation mean Belloc won't be representing the realms anytime soon. Speaking of Mortal Kombat, most older fans of the series have probably heard of Tattoo Assassins. Created by Data East, this arcade fighter tried to take MK's live-action graphics and over-the-top finishing moves to a ridiculous extreme, offering over 2,000 finishers that mostly involved dropping things on people. Drafted by Back to the Future co-writer Bob Gale, with contributions from MK veteran Daniel Pesina, whose career at Midway had stalled over pay disputes, the game starred a group of fighters with tattoos made from living ink. A total of 13 playable characters were planned to appear in the game, including instant classics like Truck Davis, a zombie named DK, and Air Conditioner Current. While its ideas weren't exactly on the cutting edge, outside of Prism, who is literally the cutting edge, the characters still had enough potential to survive in the hearts of at least a few kids that ended up in a weak arcade. At least they might have, had the game ever made it to release. Following negative reception to early playtests in 1994, and a realization that the title was far behind games like Killer Instinct, MK2, and Street Fighter II Turbo on a raw technical level, Data East opted to cancel the release of Tattoo Assassins, leaving its characters to the void of non-existence. In 2020, a flood of Nintendo assets known as the GigaLeak included an early prototype build of Star Fox 2, where portraits were found for characters that were scrapped before the game was completed. Most of these look like basic animal sprites that probably didn't make it far as characters, but some are a bit more fleshed out, like this trucker-inspired sheep girl and a human woman who's worth talking about just a bit more. This woman, whose name and origin couldn't be recalled by the game's programmer Dylan Cuthbert, wasn't just close to being the first human in Star Fox, but came close to representing a first for Nintendo as a whole. While Star Fox 2 wasn't officially released until it was included in 2017 Super NES Classic Edition, the game was programmed in 1995, meaning this unnamed character almost became the first black woman to feature in a Nintendo game, predating F-Zero X's Kate Allen by several years, with that game starting development in 1996 before releasing 2 years later. This woman, and humans as a whole, would be dropped from Star Fox 2 well before it reached a completed state, and the series hasn't revisited any similar ideas since. Darkel was a planned NPC for Grand Theft Auto 3, meant to be a recurring character in the game's story. He was mentioned in GTA 3's instruction manual and the game's website, with a full model for the character left in the game's files. But for years, fans could only speculate about his purpose in the game and the reason for his removal. While the most common theory was that he was a terrorist character removed because of post-9/11 tension, that wasn't actually the case. Rockstar revealed years later that Darkel was meant to be the leader of a group of bums that would give you, quote, crazy missions. It was felt that these didn't fit in with the rest of the game, both in tone and quality, and Darkel's presence was trimmed down until there was nothing left. His only possible remnants in Liberty City, and GTA as a whole, are a group of homeless characters with Molotov cocktails beneath a tunnel near the Harwood train yard, which may have been related to Darkel's missions. Self was a mysterious secret boss deleted from Sonic Team's 1996 game, Nights into Dreams. Based off Carl Jung's research about dreams and the self, hints at the character's existence captured the imagination of the game's fans in the early 2000s, leading to early data mining attempts and questions to original developers to try and find out more about who Self was meant to be. While this has uncovered graphics related to the character, including a name tag and boss icon, Self's true appearance and role in the game's lore are still unknown over 25 years later. YouTube user DigiValentine actually did a great video on the Knights community's search for Self, and it's definitely worth checking out if this is an entry that interests you at all. 2015's Bloodborne is another game with a number of cut bosses and enemies, though fans were happy to find out they're all fully programmed and in the game's files. 2 of these removed bosses have no remaining traces in the game's lore, and for all intents and purposes, are considered non-existent in the game's universe. These are the Great One Beast, a 4-legged monster covered in sharp black fur, and a cut form for Moon Presence, the final boss of the game, seemingly inspired by H.P. Lovecraft's Nyarlathotep. Both of these enemies can be fought using codes for the Chalice Glyph, but because of their unfinished state, their dungeons are glitched, and fighting them risks corrupting the player's save data. In original concepts for Sonic the Hedgehog, the Blue Blur saw himself paired with a blonde bombshell named Madonna, presumably named after Madonna. Described by designer Naoto Oshima as a male fantasy, the character was reportedly cut for content reasons by Sega of America product manager Madeline Schrader, who authored the infamous Sega of America Sonic Bible. Aspects of her character, which seemed to start and end with a desire to get weird with Sonic the Hedgehog, were eventually reused for the more species-appropriate Amy Rose, while her name and appearance were the basis of Madonna Garnet, a character in Sonic's Archie comic series. Given what happened the last time Sonic broached the dubious line of human-animal relations, it's likely Madonna won't be the first concept Sega goes back to when designing new characters. And in a rare case for this list, it's probably one of the times we're all better off for it. Cesar A. Cruz once said art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable, and by that definition, there's no video game more artistic than Gex the Gecko. The series of games starring a wisecracking lizard who only speaks in out-of-date pop culture references represents the peak of virtual disturbia, and the fact we've gone 20 years without seeing him headline the title is a crime against art as a whole. But in April of 2022, fans, haters, and everyone in my DMs would get a small glimpse of a better world when a 2001 prototype for a spin-off called Gex Jr. was leaked online. Starring a character that's presumably Gex's son, the game would have featured the series' signature humor, with its references updated to reflect things you'd see on TV if you were a kid in the year 2000.
This looks like a Teletubby nightmare.
Like Mark Twain's Mysterious Stranger, Gex Jr. is a potential masterpiece that will never release as intended, and we can only guess how the game would have explored complex themes such as lizard dads, Teletubby references, and buttons that control your farts. One of gaming's most famous troubled development stories is Rare's Star Fox Adventures, which originally started as the N64 title Dinosaur Planet. Instead of Fox McCloud, this original version of the game had Crystal starring as the adopted sister of another hero named Saber. Saber was the son of Randorn, a royal knight from the planet Animus, and that's pretty much all we know. While a version of Dinosaur Planet leaked online in 2021 and included art that still featured Saber, it was a build that had already switched him out with Fox McCloud in the story. While all mentions of the would-be hero had been scrubbed, Saber and Fox would both be voiced by Rare developer Steve Malpass, and it's likely their actions in this early version of the game were near identical, with Fox even introducing himself as, quote, a royal knight of the Lylat system, giving us a decent idea of who Saber potentially could have been. Shadow of the Colossus is a video game that provides experimental storytelling through a unique gameplay experience, not unlike Gex Jr. and his dedicated fart button. The game features no standard enemies or levels, with the player instead traveling a gorgeous open world to battle gargantuan bosses with incredibly unique designs, movements, and gameplay strategies. Team Ico originally intended for the player to fight as many as 48 colossi in the game, but realized that was unrealistic before entering production. While only 16 ended up making it to release, work was done on 9 additional colossi who only exist as remnants in the game's history. Most of these made it extremely far into development, with fans even able to piece together locations for their intended fights on the game's final map. These cut colossi are the Monkey and Griffin, who were cut before being placed on the map, Sirius, a boar-like colossus, Rock, a wyvern, Phoenix, who was scrapped due to the amount of space needed to fight it, Devil, a small gargoyle colossus, Yamori, a gecko that probably doesn't tell jokes, the terrifying worm, and Spider, who went through 2 equally creepy designs. I really encourage people who've played the game to look up more about these. Shadow of the Colossus has a huge community focus on cut content, led by YouTuber Nomad Colossus, and their discoveries have been a lot of fun to track over the years. Hinokuri was a cut enemy from Super Mario Sunshine that appeared in 2001 Space World videos promoting the game's release.
Enemy spotted.
The character is notable for its skull-like mask, which may look like something a little too creepy for a game with the word sunshine in the title, but really just covers up that it looks like a big baby underneath. Hinokuri, whose name translates to Fire Chestnut, was removed before release, and hasn't appeared in any Mario games since. Its model still exists within Sunshine's files, and can be loaded on any stage in the game, though it only spawns with its skull mask in the Delfino airstrip. Undertale is a series powered by its examination and subversion of standard RPG tropes, with the character Gaster existing as someone who was literally dummied out of the universe during the game's production. While Gaster pokes fun at characters lost during development, someone who isn't laughing with him is Grandpa Semi. Referenced only in the game's data, Grandpa Semi, named after semi-serif fonts, was likely related to Papyrus and Sans. Data from the game's Korean demo implies that a phone call from Alphys in the Snowdin Forest may have originally been intended to come from Grandpa Semi. But outside of this, nothing is known about his potential role or appearance in the game. Redneck Kong, also known as Crappy Kong, was a member of the extended DK family set to make his debut in Diddy Kong Pilot, a planned Game Boy Advance sequel to Diddy Kong Racing. While the game was eventually cancelled and retooled into 2005's Banjo pilot following Microsoft's acquisition of Rare, Redneck Kong actually met his end much earlier on. Later development screenshots of the game show the character replaced by the more well-known Candy Kong, and while early builds of Diddy Kong Pilot have made their way online, even those don't include Redneck Kong, with Diddy taking his place if he's selected in-game. It appears Redneck Kong was an early casualty of the game's development, with Rare outright stating he had been, quote, killed off. While I won't believe it until I see the body for myself, it's been over 20 years since Rare worked with Nintendo, which means they likely won't be programming a funeral for Redneck Kong anytime soon. Zoe, also known as Sexy Tekken Force, yes that's an official name, was a new character being planned for inclusion in Tekken 5. She was designed to be a Crow rank Force member from the state of Texas, and had a number of fighting styles considered. Katsuhiro Harada, the game's director, ended up feeling her appearance was risque enough that it could affect the game's rating, and had her pulled from the roster. She appeared on a fan poll for a new character in Tekken Revolution, but lost to Sexy Vampire, who would be released as Eliza in 2013. Zoe hasn't been heard from since, and 10 years later, has yet to make an official appearance within Tekken canon. Gojira is the editor ID of a fire-breathing big boy in Fallout New Vegas, capable of leveling everything in sight. Unable to be found in the game unless spawned through console commands, the true purpose and location of this overgrown gecko was a unique mystery to fans, until it was revealed in 2012 to be a creation of developer Seth McCaughey, who made Gojira to terrorize Camp McCarran for nothing more than his sick, twisted pleasure. While the character technically exists within the game's files, Gojira is still stranded outside of Fallout's proper canon, and will unfortunately never hear NPCs talk about a giant gecko burning whole settlements to the ground. Apex Legends is a title that faces huge leaks at least once a year, giving fans a look at content and characters years before they potentially appear in-game. While this can create a lot of excitement for future seasons, it can also create false expectations, and has led to the reveal of several legends that would never see release. Nomad was a legend meant to utilize a loot compass and crafting table, but had his abilities folded into Rosie, who became Loba. Pariah was a simulacrum character leaked before Season 8. Their design featured a dark mask and LED-lit face, and their abilities allowed them to see enemy health bars and locations. This character was redesigned into Season 10's Seer. Husaria, who was leaked when the game first launched, gestated for years before her abilities were used for Mad Maggie, who became playable in Season 12. Even now, communities exist that track information on Apex content well ahead of its formal release. And while it's always fun to see what new characters and gameplay elements Respawn has in the works, it's also worth remembering that until they release, any one of them could be another legend never told. The original Star Wars Battlefront series from Pandemic Studios still stands as the pinnacle of Star Wars gaming, and the loss of Battlefront 3 was, and still is, remembered as a tragedy by Star Wars fans. First leaking in 2009, one of the biggest losses of the title was its planned exploration of what-if scenarios that changed the story and alignment of the series' most iconic characters. While later leaks for a planned Battlefront 4 would show art for ideas like a redeemed Vader, an evil Luke, a Jedi and Sith Leia, and other alignment swaps, the early headliner was Battlefront 3's concept art of a dark Obi-Wan Kenobi. Pieces focusing on this evil version of the iconic Jedi Master were first leaked after the cancellation of Battlefront 3, and gave fans their first and most memorable look at some of the ideas they'd never get to see finished. But that's okay, at least EA's games are good, right? Capcom Fighting All-Stars: Codeholder was a 2003 crossover fighting game that was tested in arcades but never received a wide release. Featuring a range of characters from Street Fighter, Final Fight, Rival Schools, Strider, and Darkstalkers, the game's roster was rounded out by a small crew of original characters, similar to Marvel vs. Capcom 2's Ruby Heart, Sansan, and Amingo. These characters were Ingrid, Dee Dee, Rook, and Avel, and were the titular code holders. While Ingrid would make it into future Capcom fighting games, with Rook and Dee Dee getting canon mentions after her inclusion in the Capcom Fighters Network, the game's boss character Avel, also known as code holder Death, would never exist beyond the cancelled game. Behind the scenes info about Capcom Fighting All-Stars, posted in 2016, revealed Avel's name, full render, and a supposed connection to Ingrid, implying they were reflections or opposites of each other. However, this wouldn't be enough to get him into any of Ingrid's future appearances in the Capcom universe, leaving Avel still stuck outside of canon nearly 20 years later. Wovama and Q Takagi were characters programmed into Soul Calibur 2 that never made appearances within the game itself. It's possible to select these characters through hacking, though they both use Cassandra skins with weapons and move lists pulled from other fighters. In any modes that display text and pictures for character names, Q Takagi will show the name for Spawn, who was exclusive to the Xbox version of the game, while Wovama will show the portrait for the GameCube exclusive Link. Sonic Adventure Sky Chase stands out as one of the game's most unique levels, with players controlling Tails' plane to shoot enemies out of the sky while avoiding incoming fire. But the straightforward bonus stage was originally supposed to take a much more vicious turn, thanks to the inclusion of a multi-headed mechanical dragon meant to chase and attack the players throughout the level. The Sky Chase Dragon was shown in development screenshots and was seen when the game was unveiled at the Tokyo International Forum, but would end up being cut before release. Its model and animations still exist in the game's files, and can be added through hacking, but it can't actually do any damage. This thing is massive, creepy, and genuinely unique, and if added, I don't think it's a stretch to say it could have gone down as one of the more memorable robots in Eggman's arsenal. Twilight Princess was a groundbreaking entry for the Zelda series when it released back in... oh god, I'm so old. The title introduced several new ideas to the series, including Midna, Wolf Link, and character designs that would be adopted for the main cast spin-off appearances. But two ideas that never made it to completion were the Armos Titan and the Goron Golem. These were both gargantuan enemies found in the Twilight Princess beta. The Armos Titan was a tall statue with heavy arms and short legs that would chase Link if he approached it, and could be deactivated by shooting an arrow into its back. The Goron Golem is exactly what it sounds like, a massive opponent formed from dozens of rolled up Gorons. Obviously the removal of this enemy doesn't make Gorons non-canon, but their ability to turn into Megazords is still up for debate. Neither of these ideas have made their way into future Zelda games, and while both enemy types can be hacked into Twilight Princess, they can't deal any damage to Link, meaning players will never get a chance to fight them as originally intended. One of Resident Evil 4's most enduring characters is the always present, always friendly weapons merchant, a mysteriously infected, mysteriously Australian man who sells you weapons and upgrades throughout the game.
Got a selection of good things on sale, stranger.
While the merchant has yet to reappear in a mainline Resident Evil title, a new merchant was originally planned to appear in Resident Evil 5. The game's files include a very rough model for an early take of the character, with its art book showing that Chris and Sheva would have seen him through a slit in a closed door. Just like in RE4, players would have been able to purchase weapons and supplies, with early ideas including the ability to steal from him as well. This would eventually be dropped for a more straightforward inventory screen, removing the merchant altogether. While the original merchant will get his time to shine again in the upcoming Resident Evil 4 remake, it's still a loss for the series that we haven't had another chance to meet this character, or anyone like him, since. Gus, also known as the Prospector, was a planned side character in 3D Realm's original version of Duke Nukem Forever. Shown in early screenshots and promo material for the game, Gus was intended to be a recurring ally of Duke and the Earth Defense Forces. He would be scrapped before Gearbox's version of the game released, and it's unknown how far he survived into development, with 3D Realms having infamously started and restarted on multiple versions of the game. A popular DNF-based mod for Duke Nukem 3D places Gus in the game's final stage, but his intended role, relationships, and fate within Forever's story are still unknown. Sniper was an unreleased hero character intended for 2012 Skylanders Giants. They can be found in the game's files and implemented into gameplay, though much of their character remains unfinished. While they appear in-game as a modified blaster troll, using a variety of ranged weapons to attack, the character model on the upgrade screen is displayed as a red-colored Spyro, implying both models may have just been placeholders. If meant to appear as a blaster troll, Sniper would have been just the second troll to be a playable hero after Boomer, a character from the series' first game. The name Sniper was most likely a placeholder as well, with most Skylanders being named after their abilities or appearance while in testing stages. What's especially interesting about the idea of scrapped Skylanders is the toy production that goes along with the game. Because figures need to be produced alongside their in-game characters, it's likely Sniper's model was being worked on alongside their moveset, meaning there is a chance that concept art of the character and its associated figure was made, even if it didn't reflect what could be accessed within the game itself. City Kong, also called Hat Kong, Commuter Kong, and Inspector Kong, was a character that looked ready for a spot in 1995's Donkey Kong Land after being shown off in a preview of the game for Nintendo Power. But when it was released for Game Boy, City Kong was nowhere to be found. Employees of developer Rare have talked about plenty of unused concepts and characters in the past, but City Kong's intended purpose, as well as his final fate, have never been explained. Though given the number of videos he's appeared in, and the number of nicknames he's earned through the years, it seems like fans have put more thought into this character than the dev team ever did. While Fallout New Vegas is home to plenty of cut content, such as the aforementioned Gojira, one character that stood out amongst its hordes of unused humans is an Asian man known as Zamo. The character has white hair, and appears to be wearing the same suit as Eulogy Jones, the head slaver of Paradise Falls in Fallout 3. The implications of this connection, and Zamo as a whole, would never be fleshed out, and given that Fallout games usually don't take place concurrently, it's unlikely he's earmarked to show back up in the Wasteland anytime soon. Nintendo's Project Hammer is a long-forgotten title that was announced in 2006 for release on the Wii. Made by Nintendo Software Technology, who produced 1080 Avalanche and Metroid Prime Hunters, the game was designed to appeal to hardcore audiences in the West, an approach that's rarely, if ever, worked out well. The game was meant to be led by a cyborg named M09. Created by the government as part of an initiative called Project Hammer, players would control M09 as he battled against a raging cyborg army to defend his country, mostly using, and try not to be surprised, a big hammer. Following disagreements between Nintendo and the US-based developers over the game's style, Project Hammer would be redesigned several times before being cancelled completely in 2009. While the title didn't appear to be anything groundbreaking, Project Hammer's status as a first-party Nintendo game means that if it had released, we could easily be living in a world where lead character M09 is a modern mainstay of both the extended Nintendo family and the Super Smash Bros. Roster. The Spirit of the Ancient Traveler is a cut enemy from Skyrim that's just kind of a cool ghost. It can be spawned using in-game console commands, but isn't especially powerful. And while there is an item in Wayward Pass called Skull of the Ancient Traveler, which can spawn multiple times at different above-average weights, its relationship to the spirit and the reason it's so heavy both go unexplained in the game's lore. Nintendo's Super Metroid contains data for unused enemies known as Stokes. These chubby little space lizards resemble tiny versions of the boss character Crocomire, though there's no official info tying them together. While their sprites are present within the game's files, their AI is incomplete and can't recognize slopes in the game's floors. Artist Masahiko Mishimo, who helped with character design for Super Metroid, mentioned in an old interview that his original designs for certain characters were too charming and made players feel bad for killing them, pointing to Crocomire as an example. It's possible the same mentality is what kept the Stokes out of the Metroid universe. I mean, look at him. He's so little. He's so little. He's just a little guy. Hollow Knight is a game with a few different cut enemies and NPCs, but none are creepier than this giant spider, who was showcased in an early trailer, but never made it into the final game. Remaining sounds and evidence suggest it may have been planned to be a boss in the Beast's Den, with the 8 NPCs in the area potentially being controlled or puppeted by the monster. But without the spider's proper inclusion, these theories can never truly be confirmed. Silent Hill Origins is one of many Silent Hill titles that faced trouble during development. In this case, the first game not to be developed by Konami's Team Silent was facing issues due to a confused vision and problems with the game's engine. After starting development under the watch of the LA division of Climax Group, the project would shift to Climax's UK branch, who would essentially start from the ground up. This meant discarding work done by the LA team, with multiple levels and enemies trashed as a result. One of the most interesting lost concepts was for an enemy called the Afflicted, silver monsters missing chunks of flesh that would lunge at the player to attack. While the Origins project as a whole would be saved from disaster, smaller parts within it, such as the Afflicted, have yet to make a proper appearance in the Silent Hill series, leaving their own origins completely unknown. Birdman is a fan nickname for one of the more impressive enemies cut from Doom 3. Showcased in an early 2001 demo of the game, this blue alien avian was created by designer Kenneth Scott as an intended Baron of Hell. Birdman would be scrapped before the game was released, but still managed to gain a small following within the game's fan base because, well, he looks really cool. What else do you need?
Very cool.
Very cool. Very cool.
In a rare moment of developer generosity, Scott would actually go on to recreate the Birdman character in late 2021, releasing the model for free on his Twitter. Edgardo was a character concepted for Soul Calibur 3 that never ended up making the cut. If you're wondering why he's on a lower tier than Soul Calibur 2's Wolvama, it's because his existence, or non-existence, is often overshadowed by Devil May Cry's Dante, who was, and still is, rumored to have been removed as a guest character for Soul Calibur 3. However, Dante was never actually intended to be included, as Soul Calibur 3 was never planning to include guest characters. While an NPC using Edgardo's name and likeness shows up in Soul Calibur Broken Destiny for the PSP, it looks noticeably different than the one envisioned as a playable character, and it's likely this intended ally of Siegfried will never get a chance to earn his chapter in the story of Souls and Swords. Dreamland of Giants is a game that may not ring a bell, but that's probably because you know it by the name it was released under, Banjo-Kazooie. When the N64 Titan started development, it was actually a Peter Pan-inspired fairy tale adventure meant for the Super Nintendo. Dream starred a boy named Edson, battling his way through the mythical land of giants. When work shifted to the N64, he was reimagined as part of a trio with a girlfriend named Madeline and a pet dog named Dinger.
Oh, look, there's Dinger. What's he doing here?
Well, he's Alyssa's date. Hey, Dinger, over here, buddy.
As the game continued development, Rare couldn't seem to find a hook in the premise that could lead to a truly exciting game, leading to some major changes, including the main character. Edson was seen as too generic, with Rare instead shifting focus to one of the forest animals that made up the game's extras. This eventually evolved into the character of Banjo, starting the journey of the classic series and leaving Edson lost at sea. Origami was intended to be a playable vehicle in Zero Racers, a cancelled F-Zero spin-off for the ill-fated Virtual Boy. The ship was high speed and presumably served as a replacement for Dr. Stewart's Golden Fox, a mainstay of the series' base rosters with similar stats. Origami was one of 4 confirmed characters for the game, shown off alongside Falcon, Stingray, and Goose in a 1996 preview in Nintendo Power 87. While the other racers could be inferred to be Captain Falcon's Blue Falcon, Samurai Goro's Fire Stingray, and Pico's Wild Goose, Origami had no clear canon counterpart, and since no characters were shown alongside the vehicles, its pilot is completely unknown. While Zero Racers was nearly complete, the early end of the extremely unsuccessful Virtual Boy meant the game would go unreleased. There have been 8 F-Zero games since then, and with no sign of Origami, it's likely the vehicle and its pilot are destined to be ideas that lived and died within a game that will never see the light of day. The credits of Spider-Man Web of Shadows showcases concept art from the game's development, including a version of Moon Knight possessed by the Venom symbiote that never appears in the game's final plot. Interestingly, despite how many giant Venom crossover events and Venomized Funko Pops there have been in the last few years, Moon Knight has never been bonded with a symbiote, making this an idea that's avoided any canon or even merchandise-based representation for nearly 15 years. Manders were an unused enemy found in the data of Paper Mario Sticker Star. Included in an early screenshot within the game's files, Manders appear to be a type of snake-like Koopa with reddish-brown scales and dark eyes. What makes the Manders unique is that they would have been the only original enemy type introduced in Sticker Star, with the game's final cast of normal enemies all being based off characters that appeared previously within the Super Mario series. While they probably wouldn't be the most fearsome enemy to ever enter Mario's Rogues Gallery, they could definitely be one of the cutest, and it's a design I wouldn't mind seeing Nintendo come back to someday. Dark Sector was a not-so-great action game released in 2008, and was the result of developer Digital Extremes compromising their original sci-fi ideas for the title, ideas that would later be used to create 2013's Warframe. While the final game starred a forgettable CIA agent named Hayden Tenno, the Hayden showcased in Dark Sector's initial reveals appeared to be someone with flashes of an actual personality. Brash, daring, and confident, this original Hayden was a space warrior described by Digital Extremes as, quote, more like Wolverine than Sam Fisher. The design, setting, and concrete character traits would all be scrubbed away over the next few years, as Dark Sector slowly and painfully took on the shape of the game it would eventually become. The history behind this one is pretty interesting, and I'm actually working on a full roughed up video for it now. Maybe it's already out by the time you're watching this. You should go check. Kokiri are the inhabitants of the local village where you start Ocarina of Time. While there are a few different models, the game's files contain 5 additional faces that went unused in the final release. These aren't really individual characters, but could have added more diversity to the village's population. And I'm sure at least one of you would have ended up with a weird crush on this girl specifically. Super Street Fighter II was released in 1993 and introduced 4 new characters to the Street Fighter II series: Cammy, T-Hawk, Fei Long, and DJ. But the last 2 were the result of changes made to initial plans for the roster, with those changes headed by Capcom USA's James Goddard. When Goddard and his team were originally sent info about the new characters, DJ wasn't included at all, with the 4th character instead being a head-swap twin brother of Fei Long. Goddard insisted that another pair of head-swap fighters like Ken and Ryu would be too confusing, and convinced Capcom to replace one of the twins with a new character that ended up becoming DJ. While this added more variety to the roster, it meant leaving a fully concepted and designed character on the wrong side of production. While the idea of twin fighters would come back as Street Fighter III's Yun and Yang, Fei Long's twin has never returned to the battlefield, with the now removed fighter never having mentioned a brother, much less a twin, in the 20 years since. Noah the Owl was a side character included in the unreleased 12 Tales Conquer 64, appearing as a mechanical owl that would have given Conquer information about stages, enemies, and bosses. Noah was seemingly inspired by Bubo, a similar character from Clash of the Titans. When 12 Tales was scrapped and remade into Conker's Bad Fur Day, Noah wouldn't be one of the characters that survived the change in direction, making it one of the most notable losses of the game's original premise. Gazelle the Peacemaker was a character created for a Trigun video game being developed by Sega in 2002. The game would never release, with no gameplay, in-game footage, or plot details ever being shared with the public. In a rare twist, Gazelle became a lost character with readily available merchandise. He's included as an action figure in Kyoto's Trigun toy line, and received multiple recolors during the line's run. The package doesn't give us any details about Gazelle as a character though, mostly just waxing poetic about his gun, and leaving us without much info about who he could have been within the context of the story. Ehrgeiz was a criminally underrated 3D fighting game developed by Square Enix and Namco, whose world featured evil corporations, nightmarish monsters, and characters that totally aren't from Tekken. Oh, and Sephiroth is there. One character that will never live out their intended role in that world is Ryo, a female fighter included in pre-release screenshots that never made it into the final game. The Square Wiki states that most of her moves and assets were reused for other characters, and while a model with her name exists in the files of the home release and can be modded into the game, it's actually just the dog from Tobal 2, who appears in the ranking screens of Ehrgeiz's arcade release. Believe it or not, Rare's N64 classic, Diddy Kong Racing, originated as a time-traveling, caveman-themed, real-time strategy game. It wouldn't be long before this untitled project became Wild Cartoon Kingdom, a Disneyland-inspired racing game that featured most of the eventual hallmarks of Diddy Kong, including the game's signature adventure mode. It would take several name changes and retools before the game would find its identity, with multiple characters being left behind along the way. One of the most notable examples is a mammoth character riding a moped, showcased in a behind-the-scenes feature in Games TM magazine. Created for the RTS prototype, the mammoth only made it as far as the initial stages of Diddy Kong Racing before being removed. It's possible the design of Taj the elephant, the guide character in the end product, was an homage to the original mammoth character, meaning that even if this woolly weirdo didn't make Diddy Kong Racing, his spirit can still be felt in the final game. In the late 2000s, Deadline Games was developing a third-person shooter with gameplay focused on a pair of main characters, instead of just one. Going through multiple visual facelifts, the concept was best known as a Great Depression-era shooter titled Faith and a 45. Faith and a 45 would have centered on a Bonnie and Clyde type couple named Luke and Ruby, a pair of lovers who travel across the country to try and escape the wrath of an oil baron. The duo's relationship was integral to the plot, with Faith and a 45's story being called gritty and emotional. Unfortunately, publishers didn't believe in the appeal of a game set in the Old West, and without a deal in place, Deadline Games would go out of business in 2009. 1 year later, Rockstar Games would release Red Dead Redemption, a gritty, emotional, third-person shooter set in the Old West. And while John Marston would end up as one of the most iconic characters of gaming's 7th generation, Luke and Ruby would end up as casualties of bad timing. Congratulations, you made it to the end. So what do you think? Should any of these ideas be brought back from the void? Could any of them have been your favorite character? Let me know in the comments. And thank you so much if you've made it this far. I write, record, and edit these videos myself, and definitely don't make any money from them, so I just hope you find them interesting enough to be worth your time. If you want to see more videos on Lost Media, Trouble Productions, and media history in general, check out my channel. I hope you had a great holiday season, and I'll see you all for more in 2023.